This presentation from the Notebook on Life applies Christian principles to daily living. From our engineering model of life, we're going to look at one of the resources. The resource of education contains three subsets that we'll look at during the course of this three-part series. That of schooling, church or religious training, and the occupation of the family. Explore with me the learning process. Where does it start? The learning process begins with the first cry, then continues at home. Your first day at school is the start of a new adventure in learning. The story is told about a kindergarten student on his first day. His mother asked him, "How was your first day at school?" His reply revealed the learning process. He said, "Well, I think I'll have to go back again tomorrow because there was way too much to learn in one day." And there will be many more tomorrows that continue throughout your lifetime. You even continue learning after retirement. Doctors tell us that by the age of 12, most of our life habit patterns will have been developed. Proverbs 22:6 confirms this. It says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." We see that what we learn from our parents will have an influence on the rest of our life. Family life plays a big role in your learning process. If you grew up in a city, then your early childhood will be much different than if you grew up in a rural area. The occupation of your father will have an influence on your early education. One's religious training, or lack thereof, will have an influence on your learning process as well. Did your family go to church on Sunday? Or was it a day of relaxation and watching sports on television? If you saw the family and location presentation, you may recall that I grew up in Nebraska. My parents were farmers. My father, who was the oldest of four sons, attended school until the 10th grade, when in 1929 my grandfather said he was needed on the farm and that schooling would have to wait. It was the beginning of the Depression, and times were tough. Well, as you know, once out of school, it's hard to go back. Yet years later, he graduated from a 2-year ag course offered by the University of Nebraska. He sacrificed many things to make sure that I finished school. Education was important to him, yet the occupation of his father had a great influence on his education. I learned many things about engineering from my dad. I remember designing new pieces of farm equipment when I was about 10 years old. They probably would never have worked, but I got the idea from my dad. My schooling started out in a 2-room schoolhouse in the country. I went on to graduate from Fremont High School and later graduated from Northrop Institute of Technology and continued my education at UCLA in business management. My education gave me the opportunity to work on the cutting edge of technology at Hughes Aircraft. Educators who study the learning process have many different opinions on the best methods. Yet, it has been my observation that learning requires 3 steps. We find the first clue to the learning process in Deuteronomy 5:1. What are the 3 parts that we find in this verse? First, listen carefully and become aware. Second, learn to understand what is being said. And third, take action and obey what was said and understood. This is applying what you have learned. The mind is an amazing processor of data. Your eyes, ears, and nose and touch all send information to the brain for processing at the same time. You can be distracted from what is being said by seeing what is going on around you, and the reverse is also true. A noise can distract you from what is being viewed. The mind has a faster throughput of data than what is being spoken. You can hear and be thinking about what your response will be at the same time. Studies have shown that the student only remembers about 10% of what they hear and 40% of what they see. When put together, the rate goes up to 60%. However, doing by itself has a retention rate of 70%. And when you hear, see, and do, the rate goes to 80%. Today, you may only retain 60% or less of this material. You will need to apply what you see and hear in order to increase the learning rate. There is an old Chinese proverb that says, I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. That's why James 1:22 tells us to be doers of the word and not hearers only. That is why Hebrews 5:12 warns against just being hearers only. It says, you've been Christians a long time now, and you ought to be teaching others. But instead, you have dropped back to the place where you need someone to teach you all over again the very first principles in God's Word. What did that Chinese proverb say? I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. That's why we find that we learn far more about a subject when we try to teach it to someone else. It is by doing that we remember. We observe, we listen, and read. Yet, is that as far as it goes? Do we just gather information? People go to church Sunday after Sunday without grasping the real meaning. We read in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that the disciples spent 3 years with Jesus, yet lacked understanding. If you don't fully understand what you have seen and heard, then you cannot explain what you don't understand. It was not until after Jesus' death and resurrection that they began to understand and put into action what Jesus was teaching. It's not enough to just know what others say about the subject. You must move up to the second step, that of understanding. That is, to grasp the meaning. The third step is visualizing the meaning. Until you can verbalize what needs to happen, you will not be able to put it into action. This completes the cycle of learning. However, there is a fourth step in the learning process. The fourth step is to repeat what you just did. Each time you repeat the steps, you will gain new insights into how to do it better. There is a danger in repeating only steps 1 and 2. Gathering information, book knowledge, and theory with mental application is just the first level. It reminds me of the people who take class after class on child rearing or parenting, yet have not had the opportunity to raise children of their own. They can tell you how to do it because they've read it in a book. In order for real learning to take place, it must be put into daily life experience. This brings us to the second level. Raising children is a life-oriented experience. If you are a parent, you have a first-hand awareness of the situation, and you also have an understanding. You know the cause and effect of one's actions, and you know the gain and loss that will result. You have an improved ability to apply the right application because you have the wisdom from past experiences. This is where the real learning begins. The right application of knowledge is called wisdom. In Matthew 13, Mark 4 and Luke 8, we find Jesus giving the parable of the sower. In this parable, we find the different levels of learning and why it is sometimes difficult to put into practice the information that we have gathered. It starts out with the seed falling on hard ground or a highway. When we hear new information for the first time, we may ignore it, refuse to accept it, or find no value in it because of a total lack of interest, or it may be hard to understand. The second example of rocky ground is where comprehension of information takes place, yet there is a limited interest and other areas of learning may be of greater importance. The more experience we gain, the better understanding we have, and we move from rocky to thorny ground. The thorny ground is where new information begins to be understood. Value is now found in this information, and the first signs of applying the information to life begins. When we're able to apply what we have learned, we find that we have moved from thorny to good ground. The good ground is where new information is understood and found to be valuable. It is applied to life each day. Becoming aware, understanding, and applying can take time. It may not happen overnight. There is a reason for that. It's connected to one's ability and willingness to learn. How do we progress from one level of ability to another? It takes time before we start to comprehend. The more experience we gain, the better understanding we have. We find these 4 levels in each of us as we grow into adulthood. In fact, we move up and down depending upon the task at hand. The first level, the unable and unwilling, we see as newborn babies. Learning is limited to how to get the attention of others when they're hungry. The second level is unable yet willing, first happening around the age of 2. Example is learning to tie one's shoes. How many times have you heard a 2-year-old say, "I can do it myself"? They're eager to learn, to do new things, yet their ability is limited. The third level of able and unwilling shows up around the age of 13. It's hoped that they will grow out of this unwillingness and become able and willing when they reach adulthood. One's ability and willingness will be a major factor in their success in life. We can illustrate this learning process another way. You've all heard of the learning curve. There is a learning curve to everything that we do. It starts at awareness, and as you start up the curve, you reach some level of understanding. It's not until you have some experience that you reach a better understanding and your learning increases. As you reach the top of the learning curve, you have the experience to apply what you have just learned. What we find is that at each level of life, there appears to be a maturity point, only to find that it's the start of another curve. Remember the kindergarten boy who said, "Well, I think I will have to go back tomorrow because there was too much to learn in one day"? He was right. 1 Corinthians 13:11 gives us insight into the learning process. It says, it's like this: "When I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. But when I became a man, my thoughts grew far beyond those of my childhood, and now I have put away the childish things." This verse would indicate another level of learning. When the kindergarten student finishes elementary school, the next curve starts. Research science on human behavior tells us that by the age of 12, most of our life habit patterns will have been developed. Yet our learning process continues. I heard a high school senior say, "Why do I need to go to school anyway? It's just a waste of time, and you don't learn anything." I want to go earn some real money, and I don't have time just to sit in school. We need to ask two questions. Where did they get the idea that they were not learning anything in school? Did a parent, while trying to motivate them, say, "You'll never amount to anything anyway. Your sister gets better grades than you do"? Or maybe they feel that they know it all, and school is not interesting. Where do you think they are on the learning curve? Those who go on to college find that they are at the bottom of another curve when they enter college. Looking back, they can see the experience that they have gained as they have progressed up the learning curves. When they graduate, guess what they find? They're at the bottom of another curve. I find it interesting to hear elementary students talk about their maturity. In fact, a mother said, "My 2-year-old is very mature." Really? Mature as compared to what? After 39 years on the cutting edge of the aerospace and electronic industry, I was at the top of my game. I had arrived. Arrived at what? Retirement? And what did I find? I was at the bottom of the retirement curve. Remember 1 Corinthians 13:11? If you read the next verse, we find that in adulthood, we've not progressed very far. It says, "In the same way, we can see and understand only a little about God now, as if we were peering at His reflection in a poor mirror. But someday, we're going to see Him in His completeness, face to face." In other words, we are like the kindergarten children. Even though we may appear to be adults, we know very little about God. You may have observed that not everyone learns at the same rate. Everyone's learning curve is different. Some people learn faster than others. Those who are professional educators tell us that 1 in 5 people have a learning disability. When they tell you this, what are they trying to say? They're doing what 2 Corinthians 10:12 says not to do. When we compare ourselves with others, we're being foolish. Comparisons can make one feel proud because we think we're better than they are. We see great leaders in the Bible who would have been classified as having a disability or handicap, and yet God used them. Take Moses as an example. Then in Judges 3:15, the left-handed judge was considered to be handicapped. When you look up famous left-handed people on the internet, the list is quite extensive. Example, Steve Forbes, businessman; Henry Ford, car maker; Wally Schirra, astronaut, to just list a few. I found that when asked to read aloud in school, I said words that were not there. Some in my class thought I was trying to be funny. What was discovered later in life is that I have a condition called dyslexia. It is said to be a neurological disorder with biochemical and genetic markers. Dyslexia was originally defined as a difficulty with reading and writing that could not be explained by general intelligence. Okay, why do I have it? Interesting that it says it's a genetic marker. This would indicate that it is a family heritage. Genetic markers are in everyone's background. Genetic markers show that through one man, Adam, sin entered the world. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but you're not perfect either. When an educator tells you that you have a learning disability, tell him thank you. God gave that to me for a special reason. God has a special job for me to do, and with His power, I can do it. People have asked, what about the severely handicapped? Those with conditions like MS. I know of a case where the person was not able to accomplish much, yet the family accomplished more because of the handicap. Case in point is Lon Solomon's daughter. In her condition, she was not able to build the building to care for people like her. Yet the building was built, and many lives have been affected because of what was accomplished because of her family and her condition. God has a purpose for each life. The question for you today is, where are you on the learning curve? It is up to each one of us to take our learning process to the next level. What do you know about spiritual awareness? What level would you say you are on? Is your spiritual awareness new information for you? Do you find it hard to understand? Is it like learning a foreign language? Maybe you're on rocky ground. You may attend church from time to time, yet it has little value for you. You might find yourself in thorny ground. You have a good head knowledge, yet your day-to-day activities are not influenced by it. For those who have an understanding of God's plan of salvation, may I remind you of 1 Corinthians 13:12. We are like the kindergarten children. We need to go back tomorrow and learn more. At this point, what have we learned? What are the three components to the learning process? Did you remember that they are awareness, understanding, and application? What are the four levels of ability? If you did not remember the four levels, we'll review them again in part 2 of the learning process. So where are you on the learning curve? If you are not able to answer the questions, ask another question. Why not? The answer is to be found in your ability to retain information. Up to this point, you were only required to hear and see. The questions required you to take action and give an answer. Your answer was the third component, that of doing. How did you do? It is up to each one of us to take our learning process to the next level. How many times do we fail to take it to the next level? Next time, we'll look at examples of how leaders in the Bible took the learning process to the next level. Before we leave this first session, let me ask you 2 questions. They will reveal your own spiritual awareness. Are you a Christian? When asked what a Christian is, you'll get many different answers. If you were to go to the internet and search for "who is a Christian," you will find a variety of definitions. On the website religioustolerance.org, they have taken a poll and have determined that 75% of the adult population of North America is a Christian. In the Encyclopedia Britannica, one definition is a civilized, decent, or generous person who is very concerned for others. What is your definition of a Christian? Can you give a clear definition without going into a theological dissertation starting with Adam and Eve? What if you were given a 35-second TV commercial spot to give your definition? Could you do it? In 1 Peter 3:15, it tells us to be ready to give an answer to those who ask, "What do you believe?" If you cannot explain what a Christian is, how do you know you are one? Maybe you have never gone beyond the awareness and understanding steps of learning. Have you ever taken the action and told someone you are a Christian? Maybe no one has ever asked you what you believe. Will you be ready when they do? Those who are not ready will be like the Christians mentioned in Hebrews 5:12. They call themselves Christians, yet still are not able to teach the first principles in God's Word. When it comes to spiritual awareness, At what level are you in your learning process? In part 2 of the learning process, we'll continue to explore how we learn and revisit the 4 levels of learning.